Unlike Game of Thrones, I'd like to give away the ending to my talks right at the beginning, on the first slide, in fact. Let's see if this works. Yes. So this is all I'm going to talk about today, and I'm going to spend the 15 minutes that I have to just build towards this point. I've seen a lot of products get traction and grow, either in my own company or other companies, friends' companies, or companies that I was involved as an advisor or an earlier stage investor. And there's a common theme that I've observed in pretty much all these products, and that's this. The key to user growth in all of these products was nailing the primary, what I call the primary atomic use case of the product. So now you have two questions in your mind. What the hell is primary atomic use case? And what does it have to do with growth? And that's what I'm going to talk about today. All right, so I define primary atomic use case of a product, and I'll go through a bunch of examples to give you a sense of what I mean by this, as the most frequent way that actual users, typical users, use your product over and over again. And I underline two things, the most frequent and typical user. Starting with typical user, here's the disconnect, and that's why I underline typical user. If you ask the entrepreneur, the founder, the product manager, the engineer, how do you expect people to use your product, or how do you think people use your product? The answer that you get is normally very different from actually how typical user, who's not part of your team, uses your product. So that's why I underline typical user. And the most frequent, because products are used, I mean, if you have millions of users, there are outliers who use your product in different ways. But as I would argue, 99% of them use it in one way, in a singular way. And this is the core of my argument, basically. Every successful product you can think of, like I said, entrepreneurs would come to you and they would say, oh, my product can do this and can do that and can do that. They can list 10 different things that when they were designing the product, or even after they've rolled out the product and have traction, they believe that users are using their products in many different ways. And, roughly, let's think of use case as a feature for now. I'll explain this a little bit more later. But, I mean, if you line them up and you actually look at the data and look at the histogram of frequency of how often people actually use it in different ways, you will see that one of them always sticks out, like by a factor of 10 after the next one. And I call that the primary atomic use case, and every single successful product you can think of has one purpose, a singular purpose, and that's how people use it. I don't know why that is the case. I've thought about it quite a bit, and I've talked to quite a few people about this. But somehow, in people's brain, they basically want to put your product in a single slot. So when you name the brand, or when people think of a particular product, they think of a particular purpose and a singular way of using it. And I don't know why that is. There's psychological reasons for it, but this is based on my observation. Primary atomic use case is not necessarily a single action or a single feature. Sometimes it is a set of actions, a series of actions, and sometimes it is a loop. And I'll give you a few examples. Why do I call it primary atomic use case? Primary because it's really the main thing, and probably the only thing that matters in your product is this particular use case. Atomic because it's indivisible. It's like an atom. It's basically the smallest unit of actions that gets done over and over again in your product. And if you take away any piece of it, it would break apart. And use case because I really don't care, and most users don't care how things are actually done in your product. All they're thinking about is that what does this product do for me? Meaning how I'm going to use this, and then if you're lucky and your product gets traction, then you are assigned a slot in their brain for your product. And then whenever they need that particular use case, they use your product. So let's think about a few examples. Like, for example, let's just start with social networks. So social networks is interesting because it is basically a loop. There's a news feed. You contribute content, goes to the news feed, other people see it, they interact with it. Facebook does the same thing. You post, people like it. Twitter, Instagram, take a photo on your phone, goes to a feed. So basically it's a loop. Content contribution, news feed, and then content consumption and interaction. So it's a loop. Another example is, for example, smartphones. iPhone is a good example. Before iPhone came out, phones were primarily phones, so their primary atomic use case was dial a phone number and talk. Everything else was secondary. I mean, a lot of smartphones had apps and SMS before iPhone came out, but the primary atomic use case was phone. So iPhone came out and it changed the primary atomic use case of a phone, which is basically the following loop. You look at your phone, you click on an app on the screen, on an app. It could be your phone, it could be SMS, it could be any app. You click on an app, interact with it, click the home button, and go back to the main screen, click on another app, and this loop continues. So it basically changed the primary atomic use case of the phones. iPhone was the first to do it. And if you are familiar with Facebook platform, for example, Facebook platform also has apps, just like iPhone does, but the apps are not part of the primary atomic use case. The primary atomic use case is the newsfeed. So because of that, apps actually get a lot more traction on iPhone than they get on Facebook, for example, in my opinion, because it is closely aligned. It's actually launching an app is part of the core experience of using a smartphone nowadays. Think of another product, let's say Google. The primary atomic use case is typing a query inside the box, press search button, shows a bunch of results. Google search, even Google search, google.com search page does a lot more, but 99.9% of people use it in this one singular way. Another non-techie example would be a car. A car's primary atomic use case is to get in, drive from point A to point B, and then get out and leave the car. So, one dead giveaway, especially for digital products, is where the home button of the application or the digital product actually lands you. Like on iPhone, it came with a home button right up front, right? It had one button and that was a home button because it takes you to the beginning of the primary atomic use case, so the beginning of that loop. Facebook's home button takes you to the feed. So basically, if you think about it, you know, in most digital products, wherever home button takes you, that's the primary atomic use case of the product. So having said that, and having defined what primary atomic use case is, I have been using this over and over again in a lot of different situations. And one of them is when I have an idea, or when someone comes to me with an idea, like an entrepreneur or what have you, comes to me with an idea, I start asking questions. And the first question that I ask, you know, as the entrepreneur is giving me a lot of mumbo jumbo about what the product does and it's going to change the world and all that. So I'm getting all of that. I'm really applying one filter to all the info that is coming in. And I'm basically looking at you and you're talking to me and I'm looking for the answer to one question. What would be the primary atomic use case of this product? If you've pitched your product to me and by the end of your pitch, I don't have this, I normally have a blank stare at the end of it, or sometimes a squinty eye. But the point is that that's all I'm trying to get out of it. I'm trying to understand what is the primary atomic use case. But then, what do I do with it? I start asking more questions from myself or from you. And this is the first thing I think about. Once I'm presented with what I think is a candidate for being a primary atomic use case. Is that, can I imagine a world, really, can I imagine a world where millions or billions of people are doing this particular primary atomic use case over and over and over again? Why do I say can I imagine it? Because if I can imagine it, and if you can imagine it, I mean, world doesn't happen automatically. We have to first imagine it to make it happen. When iPhone came out, it was fully thought through. They basically had thought about this is going to be the primary atomic use case. I mean, not in this terms, obviously, but it came out as a phone that can launch apps. And they had this hypothesis that there will be a world one day where people take out this touchscreen product and tap on apps and launch them and go back to the home button. So somebody imagined it before they actually built the product. The same thing with Newsfeed on Facebook. I mean, I don't know if you guys remember, Newsfeed, when it was rolled out on Facebook, it was somewhat a controversial product, but somebody, Mark Zuckerberg most likely, imagined that there would be a world where people would contribute content to an ongoing feed where their friends can see it and they would interact with it. So if you and I cannot imagine a world where that is possible, it's most likely it's a crappy primary atomic use case. Move on to the next idea. Then the next question I would say is that, okay, so even if we are lucky enough that we come up with a primary atomic use case where everybody in the world is using it, would it be a one-time thing? Or I can see for decades and centuries, people would do will continue to do some version of this use case over and over again. Because you don't want to be, just jump the shark, have something that everybody does exactly once, and then they go away, right? So that's the next question I ask. So what does it have to do with growth? This is the second question I'm trying to answer in this presentation. So the quick answer is really 4 minutes? Yeah, that's enough. The quick answer is really everything. Think of primary atomic use case, or whatever term you prefer to call it. That's the term I use. I don't know, maybe there's a better term out there for it. But whatever that one thing that you imagine the world will be doing over and over again. Once you have that, think of it as a high-energy, high-velocity flywheel, right? So people are doing it over and over again. A lot of people are doing that singular action over and over again. Then whatever goal you have for your product or organization, you have to ask yourself, and again, this is while you're imagining the primary atomic use case, imagine, okay, so let's think about engagement. Would people continue to do this? How about monetization? Does this particular flywheel, is there a way to generate revenue out of this one action over and over again? Like App Store, for example, right? It's like one action using product, either in the App Store itself, like in-app purchases, like it's a device to launch apps. So obviously you can provide services inside the app and charge users. And to go back to the theme of this conference for traction and growth, all the things you've heard about, growth hacking or growth engineering, they won't work until they are aligned with the natural way, the most frequent way your users use your product. So, to give you an example, take the case of a social network, Facebook or Instagram. So, what is the primary atomic use case of Instagram? I take a photo, most likely with my friends, and post it on the feed, right? So if my friend is not on Instagram, it is just very natural for me to either physically, personally tell the person, hey, you are part of this action that I'm doing over and over again, which acquires new users, or I tag and add a new person on the photo, which actually sends a person an invite. So that is a very powerful tool because it is part of inviting your friends to join it is part of the natural action that is done over and over again. Another example, I use this sometimes, is that, Ferrari, I'm almost done, 2 minutes? All right. So Ferrari, the car, never does marketing. You never see, at least I haven't seen billboards for Ferrari, because the primary atomic use case of a car is to go from point A to point B on the streets. And that's its driving. It is a driving billboard. It advertises itself as part of its primary atomic use case. So it doesn't really need to advertise itself. Now, going back to my main point, I hope I made it clear. Think about the main use case that the user, not what you think your product is able to do, how actually people think about and use your product, 1. 2, your goal, whether it's traction, revenue growth, getting users, user acquisition, what have you, marketing, whatever is your goal. Does it align with this particular use case? So the 2 questions you need to ask yourself. And here's a thought experiment. So I gave you guys a hypothesis. It's your homework. So if I gave you guys a hypothesis that basically all awesome products that you deal with every day, the ones that win, They have a singular purpose, and they do that very well, right? So the best way to think about a hypothesis, and believe it or reject it, is to think about examples and counterexamples. I give you one counterexample. Swiss Army knife. How did that happen? Okay, thank you. That was it. Thank you.